Hello everyone, this is POL 51, week 4. So we are doing today reading from the textbook, right? American Government, chapter 2, very interesting chapter. So, but let me remind you of also the discussion board and journal entries, right? I mean, you had to write this weekly. And for the discussion board entry, you have a video, right? Actually, two videos. I added one just a few minutes ago. And it would be on this time, right? The right reaction, paragraph 2, Biden's acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention, and also I also added some highlights from the recent debate, the first debate between Biden and Trump. Okay, so watch that video as well. And write your reaction to this. Last week was right. The video was Obama's speech at the Democratic Convention. The week before that, we saw Bernie Sanders' speech at the Democratic Convention, and the first week was Michelle Obama's video speech at the Democratic Convention. Then next time we will see watch Kamala Harris speech. But again, I may add, because this is a fluid, right, ongoing situation, I may add some other videos and put them in the syllabus as well. And then week 6, right, 2 weeks from today, we will see Trump's acceptance speech at the Republican convention, and so on. Okay, so that's the discussion board entry. Make sure you do this every week. I will remind you every time, but it's your responsibility to do that, as well as the journal entry, right, for this coming week, this week, week 4. Again, you had two questions from the textbook, which is, again, very interesting chapter. In general, it's an interesting framing of all these questions that you find in the textbook. So last time, however, we saw for the journal entry last time, you had to write something, and you still, if you haven't done it yet, do it as soon as possible, right? I see many people haven't done it yet, on Locke, John Locke, to whom we'll go back today, because the textbook also speaks about John Locke, the second treatise of government, but last time we saw a few chapters from it. The time before that, right? I mean, again, remember, you had to do the journal entry was on the question of ideology, political ideology, from the text, the short text I gave you, and some chapters from Leviathan, Hobbes, right? The book by Hobbes, right? Leviathan. And for week 1, you had some questions from chapter 1 of the textbook. Okay, so let's make sure that we do this. So today, as we speak about chapter 2 of the textbook, is the title is the Constitution and its origins. We are going to go back to the Constitution, actually read the Constitution later on as well, a few weeks from now, week week probably 8 or 10, 9 perhaps, but in any case we will see that better later. Okay, so but for today, read this chapter and see the various the chapter outline, right, is clear as well. Is divided the chapter into the pre-revolutionary period, the roots of the American political tradition, the Articles of Confederation, the development of the Constitution, and then we will see also reference to John Locke soon, the ratification, and then a constitutional change, the amendments, and so on and so forth. Okay, so on page 35, right, the textbook says that the U.S. Constitution, right, is one of the world's most enduring symbols of democracy, the oldest, shortest written constitutions of the modern era still in existence, and then write that the Constitution was designed largely out of necessity. I'm reading following the failure of the first revolutionary government, right? I mean, remember the independence was in 1776, right? Then the Constitution comes later, 2 years before the beginning of the French Revolution. The French Revolution begins in 1789. The Constitution is then um, uh, written and ratified in 1787, right? So in any case, so it is here on page 36 that you find a reference to, important reference to John Locke, okay, given as in the development of political thought in the American colonies, the most important figure is certainly John Locke. That's what the textbook says. His ideas I'm reading regarding the relationship between government and natural rights. Maybe I haven't emphasized this enough last time, but this question of the inalienable rights, natural rights that cannot be taken away, rights given not by any political form of organization of society, but by nature, natural rights, okay, freedom and so on and so forth, right? Life, liberty, freedom, property. That's according to John Locke. Okay, these are God-given rights, natural rights, and so on. Okay, there is an important reference you should read that. I highlighted some passages, words for you. The reference to the Magna Carta, right, signed in 1215, right, early on by the British, right, by King John, right, and it was precisely about protecting life, liberty, and property. And so the book says this clause lays the foundation for the Fifth and Sixth Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And so, in any case, let me read this at the bottom of page 36, then 37. I don't want this to be too long, but the rights protected by Magna Carta, so read this, okay, had been granted by the king. This is long before, right? I mean, the modern even era. And in theory, a future king or queen could take them away. The natural rights, so that's the distinction, okay, so those were granted by the king. Whereas now with Locke, we had the idea of natural rights, not only with Locke. The natural rights Locke described, that's the top of page 37, had been granted by, ideally, God, and thus could never be abolished by human beings, even royal ones, or by the institutions they created. They had to do with the dignity of the human person and so on. Again, whether it's divine rights, natural rights, they are different from the positive type of law, which is human made. Okay, so read again these highlighted passages. Then you have also an emphasis on the idea of social contract that we already saw even with Hobbes, okay? And then the American Revolution, this section that begins at the end of page 37, right? So there is a section on this which is also interesting, or in any case, the American War of Independence, right? And the year 1770 is important. It's highlighted here. The Boston Massacre later in 1773. So this is 3 years before, right? The Declaration of Independence, right? And so then a reference is made to precisely the Boston Tea Party, so called, right? The Act of Defiance, known as the Boston Tea Party, okay, which has come back, the book says also today. Many who do not agree with the positions of the Democratic or the Republican Party have organized themselves into an oppositional group called the Tea Party. So that's a reference to contemporary political life. Okay, so then on page 40, okay, on July 2nd, 1776, Congress declared American independence from Britain, and 2 days later signed, July 4th, right, 4th of July, signed the Declaration of Independence that we are going to read. Probably the syllabus says that week 9, 10, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, right, the Declaration of Independence officially proclaimed the colony's separation from Britain. Right, so in any case, read all this. I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. Right, the Articles of Confederation, also very important. The year given is 1776, so the year after, right, the Declaration of Independence, but the relative failure of that will bring to then also the drafting of the Constitution. But this is very interesting, and I can't go deep into that, right? I mean, so then the question between, right, the fight between and the difference and distance between the central government and the various states. This is going to be a problem at that historical moment, as well as perhaps later. So you had this section called "What Went Wrong with the Articles," of Confederation. Read that again, especially about the question of taxes, and the idea to find a solution and resolve problems related to commerce. Okay, so there was this the Articles of the Confederation, but then this brings into, you will read into the developments of the Constitution. I'm reading from page 46, the points of contention, right, again. May 1787, there was a meeting. The meeting became known as the Constitutional Convention, right? So this 1787, so 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, and 2 years before, in any case, to put that in a context, a global context as well, 2 years before the beginning of the French Revolution. Okay, the meeting became known as the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so these delegates, 55, who met in Philadelphia in May 1787, right? They wished to preserve state autonomy, although not to a degree that prevented the states from working together collectively or made them entirely independent of the will of the national government. Again, this question between, right, the federal, then government, the national government, the central government, and the various states. You will read about the question of representation, the two plans, the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan. I'm not going to go into that. I mean, just read the difference between these two plans, and then the combination of the two. There was a time, then a point in which they were somehow there was a combination of the two plans into something different. But you have an interesting paragraph on, I'll go back to that, on page 47, slavery and freedom. We are going to go back to that also when we do read the Declaration. We will see that as well. But read this section that I highlighted, the whole section, right? I mean, which remained an important question, right? Many Americans believed slavery was opposed to the ideals and reading stated in the Declaration of Independence, but slavery remained, as we know, until then the proclamation, right, of emancipation. So then you have a section on the distinction between federal, precisely supremacy, and state sovereignty. I mean, supremacy and sovereignty are basically the same word, I mean, same meaning, but there is a difference here just to distinguish between the sovereignty of the state, the relative independence, therefore, of the state, and the supremacy that remains of the federal government, right? So, but that was a big question back then. As I said, make sure that you read the difference between these two plans, right? The Virginia and the New Jersey plan, right? And then, like I said, as I anticipated before, the combination of the two, the great compromise, okay, the end at the bottom of page 48, okay, the compromise is between these two plans, and therefore this makes possible the making of the Constitution as such, right? The Constitution consists, you will read, of a preamble and several articles. Then there is the distinction, right, between among the branches, the three branches: Congress, the executive branch, the federal, the judiciary branch. And okay, so let me read this. After debating at length over whether this is page 49, the Virginia plan or the New Jersey plan provided the best model for the nation's legislature, the framers of the Constitution had ultimately arrived at what is called the Great Compromise. Congress, it was decided, would consist of two chambers, right, as we know, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and you will see, it is spelled out how these two work. Okay, so basically, representation in the House would be based on population. Senators would be appointed by state legislatures, which is a variation, you will read, of the Virginia plan. Okay, members of the House of Representatives would be popularly elected by the voters in each state. Okay, so then we have the question of again slavery, the 3/5 compromise of the southern states, especially the Constitution contained. This is very interesting on page 50. Two protections for slavery, and if you read this highlighted section, also, pay attention to this the fugitive slave clause, okay, which is also mentioned, right, which is very important, which will go back, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Fugitive Slave Law. So in any case, the question of slavery remains, and remains even today. We will see how, when even we speak about more contemporary stuff, many writers today will say that the prison system, for example, is a continuation of the plantation system of slavery. Okay, but we'll go back to that. Then read this. This is more about the time of the making of the Constitution, the separation, therefore, of powers and checks and balances. Read this section as well. The difference between Congress that can pass laws, right? But its power to do so can be checked, I'm reading, by the president, who can veto potential legislations and so on, and read about the limits also to the veto that the president has. In any case, then the question of federal, we don't have much time, between state power. We already saw that federal supremacy, state sovereignty. The states would retain a degree of sovereignty, right? So relative sovereignty, and then you have the federal system, and also there is a reference to the supremacy, right? Supremacy. Like I said, supremacy and sovereignty are very similar, but sovereignty is here understood as only to a degree. Right, so relative sovereignty, whereas the supremacy clause in Article 6 of the Constitution, right, has precisely, and you see a reference to the supreme law of the land. Right, and the book says, this is from page 52, in the case of, in the event of a conflict between the states and the national government would triumph, okay, the supreme law of the land. Now, this rift, this, you know, very often even open fights between the various states and the federal national government are becoming right evident today again, especially in the last year with the COVID pandemic and the way what's the proper way to deal with it and so on and so forth. Okay, but not only in that respect, in many others. Okay, so then you have the ratification of the Constitution, September 17, 1787. Again, this is right 1776. Right, so this is 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, and like I said already, 2 years before the beginning of the French Revolution. So then the Bill of Rights, you have a reference to Thomas Jefferson on the Bill of Rights, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and so on. The question between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists during the ratification campaign, opponents of ratification were called anti-federalists, right? Anti-federalists, again, the system of the federal system, and the other, right, the federalists were those who were for the system, right? I mean, and you have also a reference, interestingly, to the Federalist Papers, right, written by Madison, right, and who else? But in any case, you see this here, and sorry, I lost the Federalist Papers, okay. And then Hamilton as well, okay. So in any case, read this on. Then, as I said, there is this ratification process, and then you have a section on constitutional change, the amendment process. Again, the ratification then happens in 1789, and right, the Constitution has been because the Constitution was written in 1787. The ratification is 1789, which is the same year as the French Revolution, and then the amendments, okay, amended only 27 times, and you have all the amendments as well, key constitutional changes, but I had to start wrapping up. So read the various, on the Bill of Rights, read, the various remarks on the various amendments, the 13th amendment, for example, that abolished slavery, that is on page 62, the 15th amendment that gave men the right to vote regardless of race, color, but women were still prohibited, right? I mean, it was only with the 19th amendment in 1920 the women also won the right to vote. Okay, you will find this on page 62. Very interesting things. You can think about this stuff, right, in writing your reaction to both the discussion board entry, the journal entry, and then on page 64 I highlighted some of the key terms that I already mentioned, like anti-federalists, the Articles of Confederation, the Bill of Rights, checks and balances, Declaration of Independence, of course, 1776, federal system, and so on. The concept of natural rights, the Federalist Papers that I mentioned already, and so on. And remember the Constitution itself. Okay, so then make write your answers right to the questions, and I actually highlighted two more questions here than those that I ask you to discuss in your journal. Okay, because basically in the journal I say, discuss 21, basically questions 1 and 2 would be in the textbook, 21 and um, sorry, and 22, I believe. So in any case, look at these questions. When you go to the textbook, page 67 and 68, there are these four questions, number 16, 18, 21, and 22, that, try to deal with them, discuss them, and you can that way write an interesting journal entry, which is understood as a kind of a short essay, a mini, if you will, a paper, a short essay. I say at least in the order of 100, 200 words more. Some people write more. Okay, make sure that you do this, and then next time we'll go back to for week 5 to also the same textbook, but we will do chapter 4. Okay, thank you. Bye.